Hello, welcome everybody. Welcome back. This is already the second live with the investors by Google for startups. And this time we're going to have again the Central Europe in the spotlight, however, from a different perspective. So from the pan-European investors' perspective. So excited to find out more about their investment strategy towards the Central Europe. Did the pandemic change anything or maybe everything in terms of the investment in the region? Let's find out some things about their future outlooks. So all this in a second, but before, some house rules. Number one, the session will be recorded, so no worries if you miss something, always a chance to replay. Number two, please check in for the session. Here you got a link in the chat box. So let us know who you are and let's keep in touch. Number three, you can anytime post your questions in Q&A. So whenever you want to ask the investors, use the opportunity and be tough, guys. If you want to address specific fund or person, please also specify that in the question. So I would like to now invite on our virtual stage the founder of Dealroom, Joram, who will walk us through some data-driven insights around the Central Europe. Joram, it's a big honor to have you here with us. Thank you for joining. The floor is yours.
Great, thank you, Joanna. So it's a great honor to be a part of this show. I'm going to walk you through what the data is showing on our side to kind of set the scene for the rest of the discussion. So I'm the founder of Dealroom, and we collect data about startups, venture capital, and provide intelligence to the European ecosystem. So yeah, next slide. So to start with, I think everybody knows that Central and Eastern Europe has created some big champions that really put Central and Eastern Europe tech on the global map. So companies like Grammarly, UiPath, Vinted, GitLab, and probably the people who were already on the ground knew already a long time ago that this was coming. But for everybody else, it's now out there too. I think the second point of this slide is that you start to see kind of positive spillover effects. So there have been several really big VC-backed exits. There are some really successful companies already emerging at the moment, and this is kind of also leading to a next generation of potential future unicorns and of rising stars. So you already see that some people from TransferWise, from GitLab, who are starting to launch new startups. Next slide, please. Yes. So as a result of all those big companies, the total value created by startups from the region has now reached 26 billion. So that's a really big amount. UiPath is the biggest. Is the biggest there, followed by TransferWise. Next slide, please. And so as a result of that, venture capital investment in the region has been growing very fast. So 4.3 times in the last few years, so since 2015. So it's venture capital investment into startups in the region has grown from about 300 million in 2015 to 1.4 billion in 2019. The big question mark is what 2020 is going to look like, and I will comment on that a bit more in a bit. Next slide, please. Thank you. So this 4.3 times increase of investment is by far makes the region by far the fastest growing region in Europe. So France grew from 1.8 to 4.9, which is 2.7 times growth. The UK 2.6. So those are also pretty impressive growth rates. But Central and Eastern Europe was growing the fastest. So overall, Europe had been getting used to a sea of venture capital. Like there has been an abundance. You could even argue it was getting a bit ahead of itself. Maybe there was a bit too much of investment, but it's also, on the other hand, normal for an ecosystem at this stage of its development for that to happen. And there's still huge steps to be made if you compare investment levels with, for example, Silicon Valley or China, for that matter. Next slide, please. So Estonia, Poland, and Romania are at the moment the largest ecosystems by venture capital invested. So what this chart shows is VC investment since 2013, but most of that has been in recent years. The blue part shows kind of what is the core investment, and the gray part on top of it is driven by a few mega rounds. So that's kind of skewing the data. So UiPath in Romania is now also half a US company, and that's responsible for like more than 3/4 of total investment. So if you adjust for that, then I would put Romania kind of as a third ecosystem in the region, and Estonia and Poland as the number 1 and 2. Ukraine is not on this slide actually, but it's also a rapidly emerging ecosystem, and we see in Lithuania, Hungary also some very well-known companies starting to emerge. Next slide, please. So I wanted to say a little bit about how the pandemic is affecting investment levels in the region. And so this chart shows quarterly investment. And again, this spike there is the UiPath round of 500 million. But overall, yeah, you do see somewhat of a decline, but the numbers are also always going a bit up and down. And so it's hard to make a definitive conclusion how much Q1 was impacted. We also have this data monthly, but it was even harder to kind of draw conclusions from it. I think we can be sure that investment levels will be a lot lower in the coming months. And will it be like 50% lower than before? Yeah, probably in that order of magnitude. I would think that's reasonable to see, but we have to wait and see. Next slide, please. So this is actually my final slide before we go into the panel, and when we can talk more about actually like what the future will look like. But one important thing to remember is that European VC firms are actually sitting on a record amount of dry powder. So Index Ventures just raised a 2 billion fund. Atomic raised an 800 million fund earlier this year. If you combine all those new VC funds, just the European ones, it adds up to 20 billion. So there has never been this much dry powder in Europe. We also hear that the top VCs are as keen as ever to invest. Will they be more critical? Yes. Will valuations drop? Will rounds get smaller? Yes. But investment is absolutely still going to happen. And I think that this kind of abundance of capital that we have seen in the last few years in Western Europe, like I think that has been a bit less the case in Central and Eastern Europe. So in a way, there are less startups with massive burn rates. So it might be a bit better positioned to weather the storm. But I think that's going to be a really interesting topic to talk about during the panel. So that's my last slide for today, and let's discuss.
Thanks, Yoram. Thanks a lot. I can see we got a really quite international crowd from Senegal, from Taiwan, Romania, etc. So thanks, guys, for joining. And now UiPath was quite in the spotlight. So we got really the best expert, Dan Lupo, the partner from Early Bird Venture Capital. Please join us and share more about the Romanian ecosystem, Central European, and your take on that. Welcome.
Hi, Joanna. Thanks for inviting me. I think if you look at Romania, it's more or less in the spotlight because of UiPath and the different milestones that the company reached. But if you look at the wider region, I think what we are seeing is still a relative lack of capital that is dedicated to the region. It's still frustrating to see that there is very little dedicated institutional capital that aims to invest in the region, which is a huge region, both in terms of population and GDP. And apart from DFIs, there's almost no local or international institutional capital that targets the region. Hopefully, this is changing. We are seeing increased interest both from investors that are coming from outside of the region and from the formation of new funds that are bound to increase the availability of capital.
Oh, all right. Welcome, everyone. Sorry, I was just making notes and looking at my sheet of paper. All right, thank you, Dan, for sharing all of the information about Romania. Where I'm going to ask a couple more questions in a moment, but I think it's worth to invite a couple more people to this lovely panel that we're about to have here. So first of all, I love to invite back Yoram from Dealroom, because I would like to ask him more questions too. Second of all, we have Magda Posłuszny from Speed Invest. If we could get her. We also have Kamil Mieczakowski from Notion Capital, based in London. And we also have Carlos Eduardo Espinal from Seedcamp. So now we're all together, and we can move on to the Q&A and a panel. So I gave your names. I gave your the names of the funds, but I would love to start with a quick update. So if I can ask everyone for a 20-second intro of themselves to say what's their role in the fund, what's the the name of the fund, it's already out there. What's your focus? How many assets under management do you have? What are the locations you're looking into? So 20-second brief introduction of your fund. If we could start with Carlos.
Okay, I got the Russian roulette first, huh? So my name is Carlos. I'm one of the managing partners of Seedcamp. We actually have a lot of friends on this panel because we've co-invested in UiPath, and as well as Speed Invest is one of our investors, and co-invested with Notion. So it's a great pleasure and honor to be here with this group. In terms of what we do, we're a pre-seed and seed fund. We focus on all of Europe. So we have quite a, I think part of the reason why I'm on this panel is because we have quite a amount of investments in CEE area. And so we can talk about that in a second, but pre-seed and seed means anything sub 2 million in terms of rounds. And we can talk a little bit more about that later. Okay, all right, thank you so much. Kamil?
So hey, my name's Cam, investor with Notion Capital. We're an entrepreneur-led pan-European early-stage seed fund investing at Series A stage, predominantly focusing on B2B SaaS and enterprise tech. We've been around for the last 10 years and so far invested in 60 B2B companies, including so far one from the CEE region, but hopefully there'll be more. At this stage, we're investing out of a fourth fund, which is $150 million. We announced that fund in Q4 last year and so far made 5 investments out of it. and we're looking to do anywhere between 10 and 12 more over the next 2 to 3 years.
All right, thank you so much. Magda?
Hi, everyone. A pleasure to be here. My name is Magda. I'm an investor at Spinvest, which is a 400 million seed stage fund with a pan-European platform approach. As a team, we're headquartered in Vienna, but we have offices across Europe, in Berlin, London, where I'm based, Paris, Munich, and Vienna, as well as in San Francisco, where we have our operational office. We're quite a large team, over 80 team members with 20 operational experts that are here to help our portfolio companies. In terms of sector, we're sector agnostic, but have specialized teams that focus on fintech, deep tech industry, network effects driven businesses, as well as consumer and healthcare. In terms of ticket size, we invest in seed. So average ticket size ranges from 700K to 1.5 million as the first ticket, and 60% of the fund is dedicated for follow-on investments.
All right, thank you so much. I'd like to introduce Early Bird too, because you gave an overview about Romania, but I'm sure that you can also introduce Early Bird.
Sure. Early Bird is a pan-European investor with over $1 billion of assets under management. I am part of the team that runs what we call the Digital East Fund, which is the fund that invests in Eastern Europe and Turkey. We are now at the second fund generation for the region. We raised a little bit more than 135 million euros, and we are still raising money. But we started investing. We made 3 investments, including one fairly recently in Bulgaria. And in terms of ticket size, we have complete flexibility. In our first fund, we went from 400K to $7.5 million in initial tickets, and we continue to invest afterwards, including leading later rounds.
All right, thank you. Joran, would you like to add anything about Dealroom? Because you made a short intro at the very beginning. You guys are not a fund, but you are the ones who have the most information about markets when it comes to the activity of the fund. So I'm just curious if you want to share more about Dealroom.
Yeah, so exactly, we're not a fund. We provide data about startups and venture capital. I can see that 3 out of the 5 of you are a customer of ours, so that's not bad. What we're really trying to do right now is being helpful in the market, in helping people navigate this crisis and better understand where the opportunities are, where the risks are. We've been advising several governments, but also VCs and government and corporates in this time.
All right, thank you so much. Just to introduce Innovation, because I haven't done that, we're a 42 million fund based in Krakow, Poland. We focus on European early stage B2B software companies. This is our second fund. We did 17 deals so far. And yeah, I want to move to a next thing, which was a topic during our last panel, but it's also really interesting for everyone. COVID started in March, and that kind of changed a lot of things, how the interaction when it comes to doing deals happened for lots of funds. I'm just curious, how many investments have you done so far since March? I read an article about you, Carlos, again, but this time I'll make you answer last. So let's start with Dan. Dan is here. So have you made any investments in March? Just give us a number or like a short intro.
We did close one investment, but in truth, this was something that was agreed before. Just that we had the closing more recently. But we are active. We made an offer last week. Hopefully, we'll proceed to signing a term sheet if we get to an agreement with the company.
All right. All right. Thank you, Magda.
Yes. So when we look at all the investments since COVID started in China, since January, we've made 6 investments. When you're asking since March, we've done 3 deals. And in all the cases, we have not met the founders in person, which might be also an interesting development for some funds and some founders in terms of the processes.
All right. Kamil, did you guys do any deals in COVID times?
Yeah, so early March, we had our first entirely remote investment committee, and we closed a new investment. It's not announced yet, but funnily enough, it's in the travel space, so a bit contrarian. And apart from that, we also did 3 follow-on investments into the existing portfolio companies.
Okay, all right. Travel, all right. Interesting. A really contrarian move. Carlos, tell us more about your investments. And you guys had an onboarding of multiple companies, so I'm curious to hear more about that.
Yeah, and maybe this is part of a larger conversation about investing during this time. We were born in 2007 in the middle of the previous the crisis, and part of what we committed on doing was investing no matter what. And so that regularity of pace means that in March we did 3 investments, and we wrote a blog post, which I don't know if you can share with your viewers, on how we did that, because it was the first time that we had to do that digitally. I think Magda was there for that digitally, but it's very interesting to take something you've done for 12 years in person and then migrate it digitally. But it worked out really well, and we are going to have another one coming up this month, in a few days. So we're keeping that pace steady.
All right, thank you so much. I want to talk more about the perception of Central Eastern Europe. I want to talk more about COVID, and I want to talk more about the future of this region. But going back to the first thing that I said, so I think that Central Eastern Europe, there is some change when it comes to investments. And all of us started a couple of years ago. Carlos, you started in 2007. I'm curious how the perception of Central Eastern Europe changed in your minds when it comes to years. And when we see the slides of Yoram that he presented, it is the fastest growing region right now, but still the number of the volume of the investments is not that big compared to the others. So did your perception of Central Eastern Europe change over the last couple of years, especially after the investment in UiPath, which kind of opened up the region, or it's still the same? What are your general thoughts of this region? Let's start with you, Yoram, since you're the guy who's not investing, but you're watching the region. So I'm curious to hear more, and then we're going to go Magda, Kamil, Carlos.
Yeah, so as you said, because I'm not an investor, I don't have skin in the game. But looking from the outside, I feel like the region might be a bit more resilient because there's now a tendency to be more focused on profitability, or at least less burning less cash, kind of cash preservation. And I think that the region is better positioned for that because there has been just less inflation. There's a lot of talent. There's a lot of development talent. The region is known for it. Like, there are amazing software builders, but the cost of living are just not so high as they've been in UK, in Paris, and other cities.
Okay, all right, Magda.
So I can share my perspective, which is obviously a bit subjective, given that I'm actually Polish. I left Poland 5 years ago. So in hindsight, what I would say is that I'm actually really fascinated and impressed by how much changed in the ecosystem and how much it has developed. The availability of capital, caliber of entrepreneurs, number of companies, but also their quality. Now, looking as an investor based in London, I would say it's incredibly attractive region, especially to the investors based on the West. Valuations are lower, but the work ethics is very, very high. However, having said that, I would say there are sometimes few areas that I see some of the Eastern-based countries lagging behind. So one is the availability of the capital at certain stages, especially at the very earliest stages, so at pre-seed stage, like where Carlos and Seedcam operates. It's not that available to companies in the CEE region. There are not as many early stage funds or angel investors. And the second thing would be sometimes also the maturity of the ecosystem in terms of deal making, sometimes making the terms more complicated than they're supposed to be, which sometimes might not play to the benefit of both sides of the table, actually. So that's something to be mindful of. However, overall, I'm very, very optimistic, and I agree with Yoram that Eastern entrepreneurs are definitely very resilient, which is something that we might take, we Central Eastern Europe might take advantage of during this crisis.
Carlos, do you agree with that, or what are your thoughts? You guys been investing in Central Eastern Europe from the very beginning. You did loads of for the region. I still remember when you guys had roadshows and you were coming to Budapest and other places to basically promote startups and entrepreneurship. And then over the years, you guys changed your fund strategy and you're doing something slightly different, yet you are investing in this region. What are your thoughts and what the future holds for this? What's your perception? Do you agree with Magda and so on?
Yeah, I agree with it. Maybe it's worth sort of contextualizing a little bit. We still do the roadshows a little bit, by the way, in just a different format. Last year I was in Ukraine, and I even you explore areas that are emerging. I think Yoram showed that sort of funnel of like the companies and where they're coming from, and we definitely try to visit every country as much as we can in a given year. I did the Balkans and the Baltics pretty much all last year. This year will be a little bit tricky, but it'll maybe actually be easier with Zoom. So, that's something that we're exploring. But going back to the original question, just to give you a sense of numbers, since we started, we've done quite a bit of investments in the whole region as a whole. Like if you combine the total quantity of companies that we've done if you aggregate Baltics and Balkans, we're looking at almost 47 total. And then if you look at just the top 3 countries, that Yoram highlighted, Estonia, Poland, and Romania, we're looking at a pretty good almost 20 some plus investments in that whole region, in 7 in Romania alone, prior to even UiPaths, because we believe that this whole region has all those attributes Magda was talking about, and that's why we've been investing in the region super early. So what are the attributes that we see, to your question? Well, first of all, I think it's been touched upon. There's a quality of talent. There's a lot of engineering talent. Not only that, there's a lot of a view of how to build and how to execute that is just endemic in the region. There's a work ethic there that Magda touched upon as well. There has been over the years a shifting attitude towards entrepreneurship. I remember early years, I think there was a little bit more hesitation about becoming an entrepreneur. I remember 2007, 2012, there was some hesitation as looking at entrepreneurship as like a full-time career. But I think successes across the region in Estonia with the TransferWise and PayPal mafia, as well as in Romania, has led to a transformation of how people's view on entrepreneurship. So that's a massive win. And then the 2 other things is most all companies in the region have a global outlook as opposed to regional outlook, because some larger countries in the world can benefit from having just local outlooks. The market's big enough. Most countries in CEE have to look globally from the start, and that's actually a very big positive. And the last point is there's been a massive shift towards supply of capital in the region. When we first started investing, there just really wasn't that much supply of capital. Now there's quite a bit of investors and high quality investors as well. So that's a sort of summary of kind of what we've done, the commitment that we have towards the region, and of course the evolution over the years.
All right, thanks so much. And I wanna ask you, building on this. So you and I are living in a country which is also considered as an outsourcing center. When it comes to number of reports, Poland and Romania are mentioned as a great place to outsource, especially your IT services. So I'm curious about the situation in Romania, your overlook on CE when it comes to this. So on one hand, we have more and more funds and more companies being built, but still on another hand, we have more and more companies moving into our countries when it comes to outsourcing IT services. What's your opinion on that? How do you perceive Central Eastern Europe from?
Look, there is this tendency to outsource to the region, and honestly, I view this as a net negative for the startup ecosystem part of the market. It might have positive economic effects in the short and medium term, But in terms of startup access to engineering resources, this is definitely a net negative. A lot of people are being sucked up into support roles for larger companies and not contributing to develop local companies. We are, if you want, we are together with you. We are willing prisoners in the region. We only invest in Central and Eastern Europe. So we believe that there is significant opportunity, and we see this in terms of the quality of the startups that we are seeing. At the same time, we see this also as very fickle. We see this as being acting in waves rather than a power function. There are opportunities. Maybe today there are opportunities in Slovakia and Romania. Then things are moving towards Poland and Slovenia and so on. So there's no constant flow of deal flow and constant creation of interesting startups. But if you look, if you have a wider regional view, I think the elements are there, and as Carlos mentioned, I think the mixed blessing of having small local markets, it's actually a good incentive for the startups in the region to come up and start with a global outlook from day one.
All right. Now jumping to one of the questions from the audience, and something connected to Kamil, what you said. So and what Dan you now just mentioned about focusing on a local market. But what about focusing on an industry which is heavily impacted by the current COVID situation? So I'm curious about what's your opinion when it comes to investing in such industries which are heavily impacted by COVID-19. We have a couple of people in the audience who are especially in the meeting and conference industry. Kamil, you've invested in travel. So how are you perceiving that? Are you still investing? Are you a contrarian? What's happening? Let's start with you, Kamil, since you did an investment in travel. Then we do Magda, Carlos, and Dan.
Cool. So I don't know if it's entirely contrarian, really. I think travel is such a big part of our identity, of who we are, that eventually we will all be back to traveling in one form or another. It might change its shape. It might be a very different way to travel. It might be less flying. It might be a bit more local, for example. But our belief when investing in this company that we haven't yet announced was that eventually we will all be back to traveling, and after this crisis, everyone will want to go on holiday more than ever. But obviously, the shape will change, and we still don't know when exactly we will come out of this crisis and whether there'll be recurring waves of coronavirus happening. The reason why we were comfortable with this particular company is because they still have a lot of product that needs to be built. So they're not yet at the commercialization stage. The round we invested in is really an extension of the previous seed round. And there's at least 14 months of product roadmap that will keep the company busy while the market is still not back to full swing. So we're closely monitoring the situation with them. We're making sure that they have enough runway, but at the same time, we're constantly debating, what are the offensive steps you can take apart from being defensive that maybe your competitors are too big to do now or don't have enough capital to do, and what can you do so that when the market comes back, you can come out of it victorious and really hammer it home. So that's kind of our thinking, and that's basically with every other industry that is impacted by COVID. It's there's currently a lot of disaster happening in travel, and we have a lot of companies in our portfolio that are a bit more advanced that are definitely suffering and taking a hit. And there's a lot of furloughs and really talented employees being let go. But also there's certain offensive moves that you can apply that maybe your competitors are too big to do at the moment or to think about. So it's also an opportunity.
All right, thank you. Magda, focusing not only on travel, but also other retail, hospitality, and so on. Like, what's your view? You're interested in network effects in general, so I'm curious about what's your view?
Sure, of course. So maybe also just to reply on what Kamil said, to make this discussion more interesting, I would actually say that I do not believe we're going to get back to the same level as quickly, to the same level as before COVID. I actually believe that there'll be a lasting change in terms of how the pandemics has reshaped how we think about our work, our travels, how we think about the necessity of taking a trip to the other side of the world for just one meeting. Similarly, I think there will be a lot of change in terms of how we work. We've already seen Zoom skyrocketing, usage skyrocketing. I actually think that this is here to stay, and we've been also increasingly interested since already the last year into that specific sector. So trying to find all different solutions that could serve individual needs of future of work. You see the big trend right now with unbundling of Zoom and the need for that in the market, because obviously the founders of Zoom never thought about a use case of two people getting married over Zoom or a family reunion. So I think there's a lot of need there. In terms of other areas, we have not been investing in travel recently, nor in retail. However, again, I think there'll be definitely opportunities, but right now in those two sectors, we're a little bit more conservative.
All right, Carlos.
So I think this is maybe I'll flip the question a little bit, which is, and I think Magda's answered it well in the sense that there's quite a bit of uncertainty as to what things will come out of this. So it's kind of hard to speculate on like what these industries are going to look like. So maybe we can focus a little bit on how what sort of trends we'll probably stick with post this thing blowing over. First of all, I think that this is a kick up the butt for every single health system out there that has been reactive. You know, there's this huge issue with and sort of technical debt, if you will, in the health system, of people basically not having a proactive approach to their health. You know, there's health systems that are nationalized that are great, and then now they're under the weight of some pending health crises that were not addressed, and then they skyrocketed because of COVID. And then you have other health systems like that in the US where it's all privatized, and then there's a lot of people that are excluded. So I think there's going to be a huge amount of money piling into health, you know, as an example. But travel could be a part of that. Retail could be a part of that. Like that's the thing. It's like, it depends on how you divide these things up, because for example, we're investors in a company called Thriva, and it helps with blood tests and diagnostics. So where does that fit into, for example, once you have plugged into people's health status, how does that plug into the way they purchase? How does that plug into decisions they make? So that's you know, one sector, for example, that might be interesting. Another sector, you know, again, not to copy what everybody else is saying here, but communications are going to be substantially different. But the communications at the user level are going to be different, but communications at the transport layer are also going to be very different. You know, how do you deal with more compression, and how are you going to deal with more computer vision companies that are going to be generating the traffic, because they need to, that needs to be trafficked back up to the network hub, because we have more automation. Right? Less people doing more things in proximity equals more automation, equals more bandwidth, equals better computer vision companies, equal more transport of that computer vision technologies. So there's a lot of these knock-on effects, and it depends which way you try to slice these categories. But I definitely see a change in how we're going to have our buying habits. And for sure, it's some sectors like travel and hospitality and retail are going to be affected, but a lot of them are just going to migrate to new ways of doing things. You know, like if we just focus on travel alone, we're probably going to have like a shift in a bigger bucket or a bigger purchase bucket size per customer, but less frequency. You know, little things like that, but really nobody knows what's going to come out the other end. But I definitely know that there's going to be a huge opportunity for companies coming out the other end.
All right. Dan, do you have anything to add on that when it comes to investing in industries that are impacted, or also we're slightly shifting into the future?
Look, we already have an investment in the travel sector. It's from the first fund, and it's one of our first investments. So we are in the company for some time, and I think that there are two things. One, the uncertainty in the travel sector is so high that it's impossible to say what's going to come up come out of this and what's going to be the size of the opportunity. But if you look at companies at the seed, still significant companies, especially since you are starting very small. And I think also there are other trends that are maybe travel related, but impact other sectors. And if you look at what we expect in terms of immediate impact, I think the need for automation will increase. Everybody was impacted, and we've seen companies whose software stacks could not cope with remote working simply because their applications were hosted and were not online. So automation, I think it's going to continue to be a big theme all over the world, and I think the region is well positioned to capitalize on that. And when I talk about automation, I think automation vertically, so including in travel, will be important. Automation horizontally with things like low code or robotic process automation. Physical automation with warehouse operation and e-commerce fulfillment will be in high demand. So there is definitely opportunity.
All right, Yoram, I want to ask about valuations in a second, but not right now. I just want to go back in a really quick round. So from what I'm hearing here, you guys are thinking about the future and the future for all of those industries that are being impacted. And we have loads of different trends that can emerge. And typically a crisis is creating a revolution and is inspiring people to figure out a new way. And that will definitely have loads of growth when it comes to technology connected to that. But what's your advice to your portfolio that has been impacted? So a couple of people here have investments in travel. I bet you that I can bet that you guys have X percent of your portfolio being really impacted. Is your advice for them to try to pivot into something completely different, or just extend runway, build relationship with the existing customers or the future customers, focus on building that, and as soon as I don't know, in a year or something, we will be able to go back into our lives, or maybe it will be adapted? Then what's your advice? Let's focus on one thing and let's have a 30-second on that, and let's go back. So Dan, Carlos, Cam, and Mike.
Definitely, we work with the companies to extend runway. So we already provided capital to the companies that were impacted. The degree at which the companies are impacted is different, from dropping to zero revenues to having some revenues. Pivoting is not really something that we consider at this point. I think that the market will recover. And the companies are still represent a relatively small portion of the sector, so the significant growth opportunity is still there for these guys.
All right, Carlos, let's be brief.
Well, I think that there's 6 recommendations, but I'm not going to go through them then. There's at the end of the day, it comes back to cash conservation. Really, that's what it comes down to. So whether that's through additional raise or whether it's through focusing on customers that can optimize for cash payment now in the near term, even if it's at a discount, it's basically having your mind around cash conservation.
Okay.
Does it me now? So I would say we definitely work a lot with founders, helping them kind of put on that defense hat and really figure out, what are the things that you can do now to extend your runway and to make sure that you survive this crisis and you come out of it alive. But we also work with founders, helping them think about, value preservation. So how do you act as a good partner to your customers? And maybe at this point in time, you're not actually charging them any fees and you helping them kind of get through that difficult journey. But it's also about helping founders put on what we call the offense hat and really flick the switch and think about what are the things that you can do to really come out of this crisis victorious. So, asking things like,
Camille,
what's
brief.
Okay, well, so I think that's enough. So really thinking about preservation, but also being offensive.
Okay, all right, Magda?
Yes, I agree with what Carlos and Cam said before. One thing that we do advise our portfolio companies is to think in different options and have different scenarios in mind. How would you plan if the crisis is still going to continue for the next 12 months? How would you optimize? But also have different plans depending on how the situation might evolve. So that's the first thing that we advise the founders, and obviously have your cash flows in mind and your burn.
All right, let's jump into valuations. So Yoram, starting with you, you're the one who has the macro view on the market, right? So, and you guys have data when it comes to the past. I wonder what's your opinion when it comes to valuations of the investments that will be happening right now and also within the next year. Do you think it will increase or decrease? Will we see crazy multiples, or will we actually see them going down and so on? So what's your general opinion on the future of valuations to different stages and
Yeah, definitely valuations going down across the board. There's a difference, of course, if you're, let's say, a health tech company or an online groceries company that is going through the roof, then you're less affected. But even then, you're probably going to be somewhat affected and not going to achieve the same valuation as before, just because. Yeah, that's a kind of almost a psychological thing. But then there are plenty of companies where valuations will go down 30-40%. What also matters a lot is if you're like in the top quartile of your space, then you're gonna see maybe 10% impact on the valuation. Whereas if you are just below that, it's gonna be more like 30-40%. And then there's going to be a group of startups that have a lot of burn and maybe not great unit economics, and they were dependent on, say, non-standard VC money that are going to have a really hard time to raise and might not make it.
Okay. Anyone else would like to add something?
If I may, I think if you look at already developed companies, their valuation will be reflective of what's happening in the markets, in the public markets. And if you look at the US public markets, the situation is not that bad. Actually, the valuations are slightly up on the year after taking a dive at the end of Q1. Now they are more or less in line, maybe 10-15% up. If you look at startups, I think the valuations will depend on the opportunity in the market and the willingness of investors to buy growth. In the end, the valuations are more or less driven by the amount of capital that you want to raise, assuming that people are pricing rounds based on acceptable dilution, so you don't end up taking 60% stake in companies. So if you have investors that are willing to pay up for growth instead of letting companies grow naturally, the investors' valuations will hold up high. If people will take a more conservative approach and let companies grow naturally, then valuations will come down, and that's only because there will be less need for capital to be raised.
Okay. Anyone else?
Yeah, I can add from my perspective that I agree. Like all the valuations are definitely down. More so, I would say, on the later stages, the earliest stages. Maybe on a practical level, helpful to the founders. What I'm seeing is that at early stages there may be less significant discounts, so more like 10-20%. So, for example, if you're raising 500K to 2 million, pre-COVID, typically you would give away 20% of your company, but now that might be rather more closer to 25%. However, in general, so we should get back to the regular, with the only caveat that I would say we're probably not going to see too many crazy rounds as we did pre-COVID, especially at the earliest stages. and that the investors will require more and more tangible results compared to the valuations.
Okay, building on that, on the tangible results and so on. So
Chris,
we got a question from, yeah.
Sorry, I was just going to add one additional observation that I've noticed over the last maybe 3-4 weeks, that there's this really strange flight to quality, not only in the public markets, but also in the early stage, where like 2 or 3, 4 companies that are like really, really hot are getting interesting dynamics with valuation. So it's just an interesting observation that even in this market where there's this huge shift between some companies getting valuations being, changed to the worst, there's others that are still going up in the premium, but like that's within the sectors that Dan and others have brought up.
Yeah, I agree with that, that there's a part of the investments and let's say tier 1 founders, we will pay premium on that. And then we have different situations in the market where you will see the valuations go down. But I'm curious about like how you approach your looking at companies right now. So typically in a deck, or in your evaluation, how you guys are assessing your future investments, traction is an important part, right? So building on a question that we had from one of the members of the audience, I wonder how are you going to evaluate companies that are not reaching their traction goals, especially with the ones that already raised funding, so on. So how are you taking a handicap on COVID and thinking, okay, all right, yes, the situation will change in the future and we can actually say okay to no growth for the last 2 months or something like that? Or what's your approach when it comes to traction, especially in the industries that have been impacted by COVID?
Maybe I can answer that one just because it's...
So.
Yeah, maybe it's an easy one to answer for me because we've always invested pre-revenue anyway, so it's kind of inconsequential. I think that what it changes is the dynamic of how much cash reserves to have to be able to find customers, especially for B2B businesses. It's like the sales cycle just got extended by a lot. So anything that is long sales cycles just doubled. So it's looking at traction more from a product and product market fit engagement point of view. Like what is the quality of it? How do customers respond to it? But there's naturally going to be a buffer between now and when companies start re-engaging for anything B2B. Anything that's B2C, I mean, that you should be able to start seeing engagement. It's monetizing it that's different. And so I think that there is, as you said, a handicap there, but at pre-revenue, it's more a handicap around when that'll kick in, not do you need to have it today, especially because we don't invest companies that have it.
Okay, Dan and then Kamil, since you guys are investing also in a later stage than pre-seed or seed, so I'm curious about an approach to Series A round with slightly lower traction as expected.
Yeah, slightly lower traction, but I think you can look past that and acknowledge that sales cycles will be longer and look at engagement. Let's look at companies, how clients are using existing deployments and whether they engage with it. I think that's the one measure that you can look at.
Okay, Kamil.
So I would say, given that the market is much more difficult, it also brings in different leadership qualities that we tend to discuss at a table and that we are testing with founders. And there's definitely a few more slides on modeling different scenarios, given that there's way more uncertainty in the market. So it's testing how founders think about what's going to happen, and also how flexible they are in their planning, and of course, as Carlos mentioned, cash preservation.
Okay. Magda, Yoram, anything to that? Yoram, I know you're not investing, but still.
Yeah, I mean, like nothing really changed in terms of like our criteria of investments. I would say maybe one thing that is more important right now to emphasize from the founder's perspective is to show leadership and show that you're able to communicate well and plan also for the crisis times, because it's also part of the startup journey.
Okay, so a couple of people in the audience are asking about distributed teams and remote teams and things like this. When evaluating teams in general, sometimes go with no, the team has to be together and so on. Sometimes the team has to be remote. Right now, everyone is remote. I mean, some of the companies may be working in the office, but majority of them are not. I wonder, what's your perception? Are you okay with remote teams and teams which are spread out for different countries and so on, or you have a different perspective on that? And did your view changed when it comes to current situation, or you were always okay with that? So let's go, Dan.
We are okay with the remote teams. Most of our investments involve companies that are distributed. Most of our investments were done through vehicles in other jurisdictions. We still see that this is sometimes challenging in terms of how companies are effectively evolving. But there definitely needs to be an initial moment when the team is together. Otherwise, obviously, there's a lot of opportunity to reduce costs, which companies should take advantage of by distributing the teams and working from home, cutting WeWork spaces and so on.
Did I comment? Magda, what's your opinion on distributed teams?
Sure. So we're, as Spinvest, we're ourselves a distributed team. So we certainly don't have a problem investing in distributed teams. It's been part of the startup ecosystem. What I would say maybe is important is that the core areas of the business are either placed centrally or have very good communication channels, and you have and prove that the team is operating as a whole, that no part of the team is feeling more like an outsourcing center, especially for the core parts. For tech, it's really important that the team shows that integrity.
All right, thank you. Carlos?
I think that the world is going to be different. Remote work is going to become a norm if it isn't already. So I don't think the question is really around like investing in remote teams anymore. I think that that's like a given, you know, it's going to be a given. It's really the reason why I was teasing you in the chat, Chris, is because it's such a big question about how do you build a remote team, and like, do you start with 2 or 3 founders that are together to then have key people first in the core team in person, and then migrate so you can have the export of culture. So I think that there's a big philosophical debate to be had about how you build a remote team, not if you're going to have a remote team.
Okay, interesting. Kamil, do you have anything to add?
So I agree with Carlos and Magda. You know, the distributed teams, you know, big part of our portfolio. There's a lot of companies that are either entirely distributed or largely distributed. So I think it's a question of how you manage those teams, how you promote innovation. And, you know, a lot of innovation happens on the kind of sidelines, just like a lot of magic happens on the sidelines of conferences. So how do you enable that, and how you drive this innovation when the teams are distributed across time zones and locations?
Do you think, like, building on this, do you guys think it's possible to share your culture of the company to a team which also uses team augmentation or a software house, or some of the part being outsourced? Or do you think, like, what's your opinion on that? Anyone would like to start?
So the question is really kind of how do you map culture, right? And actually, I was listening to this podcast this morning about I think it was a Danish musician hosting his first concert in a sort of a car park full of cars, and asking the audience to engage with their windshield wipers or making the car move. And I think what we need to do, we're very resourceful as humans, is how do you map the nuances of culture into digital little things, whether it's like voting or whether it's like polls, and I think we will find a way of adapting. So that's not the issue. The problem is that there's going to be a transition period. So I do think that there's going to be methods by which to transmit that culture. It's just we're in that weird awkward phase right now where we don't know how to do that yet.
I was trying to figure it out. All right, one more person would like to add something to this. Dan?
I think I agree with Carlos. We are in a transition phase. There will be changes, and these changes will take time to implement, and people will have to iterate through these different changes to see what works and what doesn't. But we need to be open to embrace change.
Okay, I want to finish this panel with one sentence from everyone, and that sentence to be, what's the advice for everyone who is fundraising now or within next 6 months with the current situation? What should they focus on, or just one pro tip? You don't have to go deep into your assessment of the current markets and so on, but like one simple tip. Magda, you seem to be ready to answer this, so let's start with you. Yoram, I also want to answer from you, since you're overseeing lots of people.
It's a difficult question because actually I have 6 advice for that.
Just one.
Okay, well, okay, so I would say perhaps, don't be discouraged by the current environment, and show how you can thrive in the times of crisis. Show adaptability, resilience, leadership. Show how you can be nimble. And still there's a lot of capital in the ecosystem, and a lot of the VCs claim to be open for business. So so just adapt and go for it.
So with one tip, you did sneak in the rest of 6 into there, but I'm okay with that. Kamil, please be precise with just one tip.
So show that you can be agile in terms of future outlook and your planning.
All right, Carlos.
This will pass. This will pass. So it's about staying gritty. Just stay gritty, and this will pass.
Dan.
Be realistic and be pragmatic.
All right, Yoram.
I guess I would say, if you decide that you want to fundraise right now, keep in mind that there are lots of people that are maybe giving up and you are not. So that already shows courage. And when the going gets tough, the tough get going.
All right. Thank you so much for joining me on this Thursday morning. Now we are at the afternoon time. So thank you so much. Thanks for everyone who attended. We had more than 150 people at some point watching us. So yeah, thanks guys for joining me. I hope this was insightful, and I hope to see you next time.
Thank you, guys. Thank you, everybody. Just a very quick reminder, please fill the feedback form for us. The link is there. And also sign up as a campus member, Google for Startups, so that you can get updates not only about the investors, but also about the startups and all the live sessions which we do for you. Stay good, have a beautiful day, and all the best. Thank you. Goodbye.